Simply Financial with Christopher Calandra, Certified Financial Planner, is an innovative, comprehensive, informative, and cutting-edge podcast that discusses financial topics ranging from personal finance, economics, politics, and personal growth. Simply Financial will cover intriguing and thought-provoking questions so that the listener can simply increase their financial IQ.
Welcome to Season 2, Episode number 23 of the Simply Financial podcast. Today's topic is state of change. It's important to realize how significantly things changed with Donald Trump's election back in November 2016. I don't want to be overly political, but the reality is that the economy and the markets are strongly influenced by what our politicians do. And this influence is greater than it was in past generations. In fact, my opinion is that we entered into a new era on this front with the great financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and 2009. Another opinion I have is that President Trump's brand is change. When confronted with a choice between the status quo and change, he will select change. In business, in the business world, they'll use the term change agent and disruptor. Oftentimes, companies that are struggling, that are in need of turnaround, they will hire and or put a person in a position of authority that is a change agent and or a disruptor. And I believe that's what Donald Trump's brand is. A good example of this, and there are a ton, is his option to keep Janet Yellen at the head of the Federal Reserve or to change to a new one. I'm a news junkie. I'm a political news junkie. I'm not involved in politics in any way, shape, or form. I tend not to donate to either party or any candidates, but I do consume a lot of news on this front. And there was a tremendous debate. Is Donald Trump going to keep Janet Yellen, who lots of people believed had done a good job heading up the Fed, or was he going to let her go and appoint a new one? To me, all along, the answer was very clear. He was going to swap out Janet Yellen. He was going to opt for change, and that's exactly what he did. He appointed Jerome Powell as the new Fed chair. And there, as I said, are lots of other examples. We're going to talk about some as we move along. But in terms of this state of change, I wanted to talk about a few with you today. We're going to talk about interest rates, just a little bit though, the strong job market. We're going to talk about the tax reform. We're going to talk about deregulation. And lastly, I want to talk about trade policy. So the first thing is with interest rates. We're not going to go into this in any great detail. I would refer you to episode 21, which we did just a short time ago, which was an entire episode on rising interest rate environment. So I'll leave most of this subject to that episode. To be fair, though, the rising interest rate environment is not a change driven by President Trump, but it is a key change. And it's a change that will be very, very important throughout his presidency. And so again, please check out, if you haven't already, episode 21 about the rising interest rate environment. I think you'll find it very, very valuable. It's short. It's maybe 15 minutes long, something like that. So please check that out. Next, I want to talk about the strong job market. On this podcast, I'll routinely talk about this in passing, but let me throw some key information out. The United States has created jobs for some 90 plus months in a row. That's a record. 2 weeks ago, as of this recording, the government reported good job numbers, and I got this report from a seminar I was out at. I was in Dallas, and they gave out this statistic that where unemployment is now, based on a monthly, it's better than 90% of the months recorded since World War II, meaning that we're better right now than we've been for 90% of the months that have been tracked since the end of World War II. We're going to talk about Donald Trump some today, but it's worth noting that this trend of creating jobs in the economy began under President Obama very early in his administration, and it continued throughout his 8 years in office. That trend has continued under President Trump. So we have this relatively long trend where we have job creation and unemployment rate being driven down. We're now at 3.9%, which is the lowest unemployment rate since 2000. Going back to 2000, that brings us to when President Bill Clinton was still in office. As a side note, not only has the major number come down to 3.9%, but black unemployment is at the lowest rate ever recorded. Under Donald Trump's administration, black unemployment has set 2 all-time lows during his tenure so far. Regardless of whether you like the president or dislike him, whether he gets credit for this or doesn't get any credit, it doesn't really matter to me. I think that statistic is something that should be celebrated in this country. It's a really, really good thing. There's still lots of room for improvement. The job picture in this country is not perfect. There's still a lot of people that are underemployed. There's still far too many people that are not being accurately counted by our government. And there are still too many people that are working part-time or multiple part-time jobs when they'd like to be working full-time. But I think it's undeniable the trend that started under President Obama, that has continued under President Trump, is a really wonderful thing for the United States and for the economy. And that means, in my opinion, good things for the market. So a little bit more information on this front is this shift to a low unemployment rate and a very healthy job market is a significant change in the economy. We haven't been in this type of environment for 18 years or so, and it is one of the notable and significant changes that's driving the economy, driving the markets. And I think as we enter into the midterm election season, it's going to be a very important part of the dialogue and a key element in what voters decide when they enter the ballot box in November. One last statistic, and I find this very appealing, is that the United States has also been adding manufacturing jobs. You and I have heard for years and years and years how the United States has been losing manufacturing jobs, and we are adding manufacturing jobs now. In fact, the most recent government report indicated that 24,000 manufacturing jobs were added in April 2018. Again, I think that's a wonderful sign of change for the economy. Tax reform. In December, President Trump signed into law the biggest tax reform in 35 years. Clearly the most significant tax reform we've seen in a very long time. Since President Trump was elected, the U.S. has created 3.2 million jobs. Since the tax law was enacted, we've created 800,000 jobs. It seems to me that part of the continuation of the trend I just spoke about and why we'll continue to add jobs and the market for jobs will stay healthy is the tax reform. Now, some of my clients, some of the people I interact with day in and day out business-wise may not see eye to eye with me on this subject, and we could certainly debate that. The point, though, in this podcast is not whether this is good policy or not. I do think, though, you cannot argue that this is a significant change in our tax policy. It is, like it or not, one of the most important accomplishments for President Trump and the Republicans. You can check out Season 2, Episode number 11, where I talk about the tax law in great detail. But a quick overview is that corporate taxes were reduced from 34 to 35% down to a flat 21%. That's a 14 percentage point differential. That's the equivalent of a business increasing their profit margin by 14 percentage points. That really is a huge driver of revenue and adding profits to the bottom line of U.S. corporations, making them healthier, more competitive, not just in the U.S., but around the world. That was the stated goal of the legislation, and I believe they achieved what they wanted to in helping out U.S. corporations, reducing their tax liability, making them healthier, making them more competitive. On the individual side, tax rates were reduced. So at almost any income level, you're seeing the tax rate reduced in 2018 compared to 2017. Not only were the tax rates reduced, but the tax brackets were broadened. So to stay in that lower tax bracket, you could earn more money and still be in that lower tax bracket. This is estimated to provide tax relief to over 80% of tax filers. There was also a tremendous element of simplification on the personal side of things as well. Standard deduction was increased. So a family of two has almost twice the standard deduction than they used to have. And what we find now is 80 to 90% of Americans will not itemize on their tax return, but rather take the standard deduction. So real quickly, itemizing is you have a variety of things that are deductible and you list them line item on your tax return. That could be charity, health expenses, mortgage interest, and the list would go on. But now that the standard deduction was increased to such a large degree, most Americans, when they itemize, will come up with a total itemized list that is less than the standard deduction. So it becomes easier to prepare your taxes because you don't have to keep track of the line items. You just take the standard deduction, and for the vast majority of Americans, that will equal tax relief. Again, as I said earlier, with the interest rate topic, please check out Season 2, Episode 11 for more information about the tax reform package that was passed in December. But this tax reform, another area where we're seeing this country in a state of change. Next, let's talk about deregulation. This is another area that it's politically charged. Many people might want to debate me on whether what I'm going to talk about now is good or bad. But again, the purpose of this podcast is just to note and emphasize how very important this change is, whether you like it or not. According to the White House, in 2017, federal agencies issued 22 deregulatory actions, meaning that they relieved business and industry of some type of regulatory action. So they pulled away regulations. So they issued 22 deregulatory actions for every one new regulatory action, meaning that if you're looking at businesses, for every new regulation that was put on the books, 22 were taken off of the books. This far exceeds President Trump's pledge, which was to eliminate 2 rules for every 1 rule that is enacted. And his administration is clearly committed to reducing regulations, and they are being very restrictive in issuing new regulations. I think that will continue. The administration is on record at virtually any level of the administration in stating very candidly that they intend to continue with this deregulation trend. This limited issuance of new regulations is significantly different than President Obama's administration. And again, whether you like President Obama or not, it's very clear to me that one of his goals was to add regulations to industry. Some of them might have been good, some might have been bad, but that was one of the key changes in his administration was an increase in regulation, a significant increase